Well, it's such an honor to be here and to be talking to you today. I'd very much like to thank my hosts for inviting me to this week and to the professorship, and it's been an amazing experience. So I'd also like to reflect on Dr. Ruth Wong. Unfortunately, I never had the pleasure of meeting Dr. Wong, but from all that I've heard from people who know her and everything I've read about her, the idea of courage and innovation, thinking about the students that need education most, and of course, empowering teachers is something that we should all really think about and take forward. In fact, in an era of data, technology, and AI is becoming even more important. And the reason why is because when we think about AI and data, we use terms like data-driven or, algorithm or so on. And somehow the human part is behind all of this. Like the technology is very powerful and it's designed for humans to conform and get behind it and use it. But what I'm going to argue today is that we need to put this on its head, and we need to first of all think about the humans, in this case the teachers, and then make sure that the technologies and the data and so on is there in ways that support the teachers. So if we think about digital or technological innovation, it's usually positioned a bit like this. And in fact, some of these are paradoxes that I want to unpack a little bit. So first of all, this idea that AI will replace all human jobs. Elon Musk was at the AI Safety Summit in the UK in 2023, and this is one of the key points that he made to our Prime Minister at the time. Now, while it's true that some jobs have already been replaced and are being replaced by AI, and by the way, I had a job which is now replaced by AI before I came into this profession. I'll tell you about that later. But in reality, that's not usually what happens. Not every job is being replaced, or indeed will be replaced. The other thing is this idea of data-driven. Everything's data-driven, and data makes us powerful. It's not humans that drive change. Again, that's really difficult because if the humans don't cooperate, here's a quote from the CEO of NVIDIA. We need the humans to be able to know how to use AI, because AI on its own is not as powerful as it is when humans are using it. And the third thing is that AI will lead to some kind of equity, efficiency at work, and so on, and AI will make us happy. But in reality, here's a Harvard Business Review article, and it says, using AI at work makes us lonelier and less healthy. Now, I could dispute that because it probably depends on how we use AI, but this is something about how we're using AI just now. So as I said, this is how we usually think about transformation. And, if you're a school leader and you're thinking about transformation in your school, you probably don't think like this because you know a few things about how schools work and how teachers work. First thing is AI replaces or changes tasks that people do. And in general, like I said, some jobs will go and have gone. But in general, usually what happens is jobs are evolving because tasks are evolving. So what does that mean for teachers? The examples on the left, grading multiple choice questions can now be done automatically and it saves time. Lesson plans can be created and that can speed things up a bit and so on. However, this is not the whole story, because we also need the humans, the teachers, to be able to go in and think about the lesson plans and think, does this lesson plan actually apply to my students, and will my students benefit from it? So I would argue that change is not data-driven. In education, it's the teachers who are making the change, and that's because they're collaborating with AI. So again, here's a list of different ways that AI is making a difference to teaching through things like personalized learning, assessment, and so on, chatbots. But I would argue that especially as you go down this list, you need more interaction from the teacher, but that interaction will be different from how it is without using the technology. But what I'm trying to say is that the teachers are collaborating and working alongside the technology. And that is very important to make sure that that continues. And also this idea of equity and efficiency, I mean, we know that AI can lead to things like bias, but it's more than that. AI creates meta work. Now, meta work is something that my colleagues and I at UCL have been researching with colleagues in Oslo University and Regensburg University in Germany. And well, what it basically means is, although AI can make some tasks efficient or seemingly more efficient, as I said earlier, when teachers create a lesson plan, they then have to look at that lesson plan and maybe adapt it and think about what they know about their students. So that's a kind of meta work, and it might not be recognized work. But meta work is more than work that's not seen or not recognized. It's also a way of all of us evolving how we work and evolving our practices and our profession. And that could be done in a positive way. Maybe I really think AI lesson planning is great and I find it really useful, so I'm going to embrace it. But on the other hand, maybe it makes me worried and concerned, so I might resist it. And what we've done in our work is not to judge whether people accept or resist as good or bad, but to think about, if people are accepting or resisting, what does that actually mean? What does it mean about the relationship between the professional, in this case the teacher, and the technology? And what can be done about it if it's not a good connection? So here I just put together lots of examples. There are many benefits of AI, and I don't want to understate that. AI can be a really powerful tool, but only if it's used in the right way. So I would redraw the cycle that we saw before to be a little bit like this. So AI is not eliminating jobs, but it's changing tasks, and it's doing that continually. And so we as teachers need to think about how do we change our work or not change our work if we don't think that AI is helping. AI mediates relationships, the relationships teacher to teacher or teacher to student, or actually there's a relationship between the person that designed the technology and the teacher, because the technology was designed somewhere. So there are all these relationships to think about that are changing. And also AI creates meta work. So there is this extra work, some of which is not seen because hasn't really been studied. So this means that when people engage in any kind of digital transformation, it influences not just what happens and what you see in terms of the technology, but it has a deep effect on us as humans, as professionals. It affects our practice. It affects the knowledge that we need to know, but it also affects our identity. If we're using AI, and the AI is a mediation tool between me and my students, what does it mean about my identity in terms of being a teacher. So what we would argue is that meta work is not just extra work, but it's a kind of way of becoming. It's a way of enabling people to develop and to reshape. And although meta work might initially signal work that's unwelcome or not wanted, on the other hand, it's a way of thinking about how our professions can evolve. And so it's a sort of scaffold to new ways of working. So in this way, we can think of meta work and the state of technology coming into our work, changing what we do, putting us in a situation where maybe we feel we're not sure what to do, but it's a way to scaffold change. But what's really important is that the change is not driven by the technology itself, but it's actually driven by the teacher's expertise. And by the way, I would extrapolate that to include parents, include students, and all of these people. So it's not just about the teachers, but of course the teacher is very, very important in this process. So what I want to do in this seminar is have a play in 5 acts. So you can see I'm going to go through these ideas, these conceptualizations of meta work, agency, vulnerability, negotiation, and sacrifice, and all will be revealed in each act. So bear with me. So first of all, meta work. So I've already said something about meta work and what it is. It's that unseen work. And what I want to do here is adopt a broad approach, because being the Dr. Ruth Wong professor, I do think I should do things maybe in a slightly innovative way. So I want to not only focus on education and teaching, but take examples from other professions as well, and then reflect on, well, what does that mean for teaching? Because I think there is much for us all to learn across different sectors and professions. They're different, sure, we need to bear that in mind, but there are things that we can take from them. In fact, sometimes seeing things in a different sector can really highlight to us something that's important for education. So I'm going to start off with health, and the reason for that is because there's been an awful lot of AI which has been implemented in health, and it's been relatively successful. So for example, there's been an absolute revolution over the past decade of AI being involved in diagnosis, whether it's for cancer treatment or other diseases. But if I take the transformation cycle that I used before to really examine what that means, well, for example, a clinician used to take some kind of scan and do a diagnosis themselves. But now they often use AI, and we know that AI can be a lot more accurate than a clinician. But it's not just the AI that's going to give the diagnosis to the patient. The clinician then has to collaborate almost with the AI to confirm or maybe overrule findings. Maybe there is some kind of anomaly. Maybe it isn't a positive cancer diagnosis or the other way around. So the clinician has to check that. And so this is a kind of meta work where the clinician is interacting with the AI, but then the clinician delivers whatever the outcome is to the patient. I mean, it would be terrible if we had the AI delivering a positive cancer diagnosis, right? I mean, so there is this meta work. And so we are viewing this meta work as a state of becoming, as a way of practice changing to something which hopefully is more positive. Another example, now this has been around for longer than you might know, customer service agents. You know, when you phone up to try and get advice from your bank or you're complaining about something, there's AI analyzing what you're saying and what the agent is saying. Did you know that? So the idea here is that there's a digital system that listens to what people are saying. It might try to detect emotion in voice, and then it analyzes and it can give the agent real-time feedback. Here's how to deal with this customer. So obviously, it's not the AI that's speaking, or it can be if you get a chatbot, right? But if you're lucky enough to get a human agent at the end of the phone, then that human agent is being guided by the AI and is interacting. There is a problem with this because there have been studies done, and the service agents feel like they're being monitored all the time. So that's not good if they feel stressful. So this, of course, results in meta work for the agents because, you know, they're constantly being observed. Okay, this is a way of them being able to learn because the AI is giving them advice, which is based on patterns and lots of previous conversations. So hopefully the service agent is getting better in terms of dealing with customers. But it is a new form of practice, and hopefully it is a way of becoming. However, the observation all the time maybe needs to be negotiated. So let's get some examples from education, from teachers. There are lots of pretty good maths applications that use AI. So, you know, students can use these in the classroom, and then the teacher will get some kind of feedback via a dashboard. But I mean, let's face it, in any kind of learning analytics, the kind of analysis and feedback to the teacher is not the same as a teacher actually making that diagnosis for themselves. So there are proxies used in learning analytics. You probably know about this. So things like time on task, or whether people can manage what they're doing, whether they're self-regulating. All of these proxies are what they say. They're proxies, they're approximations for whether or not the pupil is actually progressing. Whereas if that pupil was to interact with a teacher, the teacher would use other kinds of data. It's not just how the pupil looks or what they're saying. It's partly that, but it's also sort of gut feeling the teacher has, and that is not there in the AI. But nevertheless, this is still a good way for pupils to be able to go through, to practice mathematics, and for the teacher to then make some kind of professional judgment about who they should spend the time with. So again, meta work is a state of becoming. The teacher needs to really understand what's the best way to use this tool. ChatGPT for homework. Have you heard of that? Anyone think it's maybe an issue? So again, you know, we know that students are using Gen AI, and they might be able to prompt it, but not adequately understand what's served up to them. So, you know, what do we do about that? The teacher needs to be able to monitor the homework in a way that they probably didn't do before. So again, this is a kind of meta work. This is maybe a more negative meta work. So what do we do about it? Is there a way for the teachers to negotiate and maybe have some kind of agreed way of communicating to the pupils, to their parents, that some things are agreed, but other things we need to maybe change. So again, this is a cycle where we're going through how tasks are being changed by AI, how these relationships between professionals and other people are being changed, and the kind of meta work that is being created. And of course, I mentioned earlier about identity, because how we feel about being teachers, how oncologists feel about being clinicians, how agents feel about, you know, being call agents is all really important. Because if what they're doing doesn't fit with their identity of what it means to be a teacher, that can cause some kind of vulnerability. So To recap, there's opportunity that's created through digitalization and use of AI, but this can lead to changes that affect our identity and our culture, and it might engender some vulnerabilities. So it's important for us to think about how each of us might respond to something like this, because we could have a positive response, or we could have a response where we want to disengage. And I'm not judging either of those, because if we're using our professional judgment, then that's really important. So the next act is agency. Now, what do I mean by agency? Forgive me for going into learning science and some of the theory that we're using in our studies. I'm an academic, what can I say? Have to have a bit of theory. So agency, according to Italo Pelto, is the response that every professional has to some kind of change in the workplace. So there are, in some workplaces, no bigger change than the introduction of technologies. So, of course, when technologies or any kind of change comes in, we need to change the practice that we use, and we also need other kinds of knowledge. You need to know how to use the technology, you need to know about the data, you need to know lots of things. So the agency is how we respond. And of course, I've been very influenced by the work of Karen Norsetina, if you've ever read her work. She's just a brilliant sociologist, and she's been looking at workplace transformation with technologies for decades. So she says that the agency mediates between the professional themselves and this transformed world, so their new workplace. And of course, this is influenced by the culture, by the epistemic culture. So we know that one sector, for example, the energy sector, will be very different from the finance sector or the education sector, indeed. But what's true across all of these sectors is that whenever there is this kind of change, there are usually people who really benefit from the change. So almost winners and losers. I don't mean to polarize it like that, but if you just think about it in the way that when technologies are introduced into workplace, some of the winners are probably the people who designed the technology, or the people who control this technology, or the people who have ownership of the data. And that makes a significant change to the workplace itself. So when there are these changes, and when there are perceived injustices, like someone has suddenly lost power and someone has gained a lot more power, that can lead to some kind of resistance. Now, the resistance in itself is not bad. It can indicate that there's some kind of power imbalance which shouldn't be there. But what we need to do is to identify what's causing it, and then to think about forms of professional development that are more than just learning new knowledge or learning new practice, but thinking about agency and culture, and thinking about ways that people can negotiate how they deal with this change. So Ettila Pelto and other colleagues in Finland, they're at University of Jyväskylä. They've come up with this model, and basically how they position the whole thing is on the inside is your identity, so how you feel as a teacher, what your values are, what it means to be a teacher, and on the outside are all the things that might be changing at work. So you might need new practice because I don't know, AI has been introduced, or the setup of the classroom might be different. So what they're saying is that we need this professional identity negotiation to enable people to feel positively about engaging. So if I go back to my three cycle, it's not drawn as a cycle here, but it's the same thing. The kinds of things that we might think about in the classroom if we go back and we read the literature about not AI, but how digital technologies have changed the classroom over years, and what the kind of opportunities or vulnerabilities that teachers feel. When tablets replaced textbooks, teachers thought, well, this is kind of like a book, so it doesn't really change my practice very much. But some of them felt very guilty about feeling they didn't really understand the technology and they couldn't use it to its full potential. They had this feeling, there's something extra I can do here, but I don't know what it is. So maybe they felt vulnerable. Again, you know, when we had the COVID remote teaching and we were all suddenly teaching from our sitting rooms, or for some people, their bedrooms or their pantries because they didn't have any free space in their house. Again, you know, this really changed the practice for teachers, and they felt very disconnected, even though they had the technologies to connect them to their students. And you know, we did a study, and there have been many studies that have said the teachers miss that energy that they get from the face-to-face connection with the students, so they felt vulnerable. And a third example, if students work independently using digital tools, we know that students need to be very self-regulated to do that. So there's a real danger here that the way that tools have been designed pedagogically, sometimes by technical designers and not teachers themselves, almost takes away from the teacher being able to design a pedagogy for their pupils, and they can feel really detached. So again, this can create a vulnerability amongst teachers. So again, if we think about just reflecting back to the previous act of meta work, we know that meta work is an opportunity to be able to reshape practice and to be able to do things in a positive way. However, if there's a mismatch between what someone's professional identity is as a teacher and what they feel they're doing, and that makes them feel vulnerable, then we have a problem, and we need to be able to deal with that problem. And the problem is only going to get worse as technology expands. So I'm going to focus on some of these vulnerabilities, and I'm going to tell you about some of the research that I've done with my team over the last few years. And these vulnerabilities are from people who are working in completely different sectors. But I hope that we can then come back and reflect and think, are any of these relevant to education? So the first, I've got two case studies, and the first is we've been working with people who've been really at the cutting edge of digital transformation. These are radio astronomers. We're working with groups of people who are involved in what's called the Square Kilometre Array. Now, this is a project which is across 26 countries, and it's basically 2 arrays of huge radio telescopes in South Africa and Australia. And what's going to happen is in the future, when these telescopes are ready, the astronomers are going to ask the teams that look after these telescopes to point the telescopes at a certain point of the sky for a certain time. They will then gather the data will be cleaned, and it will be sent to the astronomers. So that's a very, very different way for the astronomers to work compared with what they do currently, which is they point their telescope, they take their data, they clean it, and then they analyze it. So this is a huge leap for the whole astronomy community. Now, why do they need to make this leap? So on the one hand, these new telescopes will allow them to look back in time. They tell us they're going to get nearer and nearer to the beginnings of the universe. So they're going to be able to make fundamental discoveries which are not possible now without this. But on the other hand, they feel that their work has really changed and it makes them vulnerable. So let's go through the vulnerabilities and then reflect on them in terms of whether any of these make sense when teaching is digitalized. So we interviewed about 26 of these people working on this project, and they were all different levels. So some of them were senior, some of them were junior, and then we did a thematic analysis. And these are the kinds of things that they told us about how they feel vulnerable. Well, firstly, I've already mentioned this. They're worried about systemic practices being changed. I've got lots of text in here so I can bring in their voices. But the main point is they're worried about change in practice. Now, maybe that's true for teachers as well, right? Maybe teachers are worried about the way that we interact with our students, and maybe that makes us feel vulnerable. A second theme was that they felt they weren't as free to work in the way that they used to work. They used to get their own data and then clean it up. And now they had to rely on other teams to clean their data. The reason why is there is so much data, huge amounts. So they have to be sent the cleaned data. So they feel really vulnerable about that. So maybe as teachers, we also fear losing control, because what we do with AI and with different technology systems is pretty controlled by the people who designed the systems rather than by us as teachers. A third thematic concern was lack of recognition, and this particularly came from the early career people. So typically, these astronomers will now work in huge networks instead of being in smaller groups. So some of the early career people said, how do I let people know how I've contributed to this project? And, you know, what can I do to make sure that my career progresses? Well, again, maybe there are some teachers who are worried that what they do is not properly recognized. Erosion of trust. I mean, this is really about, for these astronomers, they're not just working with other astronomers. They're also working with the technical people, the people that designed the systems, the people that are analyzing their data and so on. And I think that is very true in education as well, that we don't just work with the people that we've worked with before, but as soon as you introduce any kind of technology system, you're indirectly working with the people that design and run the system. And then, of course, difficulty with communication, because as soon as we introduce technologies or data, we're becoming much more multidisciplinary, and it can be really difficult to communicate. So how can a teacher let, I don't know, a technology company know exactly how it is to teach when much of it is pretty intrinsic, or even maybe we feel they don't understand the language that we use or the terms we use, or they use these terms in a different way. And of course, the final one is unequal resource access. So this is really important as well. Not everybody can have access to the same resources. So some people feel a bit vulnerable about that because they feel that other people are being favored. So that's quite a list of vulnerabilities that we found. And I'd like to hear from you whether these are relevant to education or not. In my view, some of them are, some more than others. But even if none of them are, if we think about this in terms of education, digitalization, people must feel vulnerable. Okay, so then we tested this again in a second case. And the reason why we tested it was to see, will these vulnerabilities be the same, or will some of them be different? So this time we were looking at people who share data. So these are biologists, sociologists, people who make their data available and share data from other people. And again, you know, they've developed new systems and their work has had to change quite radically in the past few years. So these are the kinds of thematic concerns that we found from this group. First concern was the same as the last time. So they're worried about the systemic practices, the things that they do that make them feel like a astronomer, a biologist, or, or in our case, a teacher, is changing. So they really worry about that. The second, again, same as last time, they worry about losing control, because before they had more oversight over the data and now they don't. So again, maybe that is something that teachers feel when they use systems. The third, again, similar to before, early career people felt that recognition, what they do now in new practices, is not recognized, because people recognize the way that people used to work. So that's a problem. And then, of course, there was fear of judgment. This was a new vulnerability. People were really worried using technology can make one's work very visible. So for a teacher, for example, that might mean, well, now their work is visible outside the classroom and all kinds of people can see it. And the work can be analysed in ways that maybe we don't agree with or we don't understand. So here's another vulnerability. And then leadership not prioritising or not supporting these new ways of working. And this is particularly difficult for early career people as well. So yeah, this was another new vulnerability. So we ended up with an expanded set of vulnerabilities that span from fear of judgment to concerns about practice changing to being concerned about leadership not prioritising these new ways of working. So how can we support this? I mentioned earlier what I want to do is to argue for a broader range of different types of professional development. And, these are the kinds of ways that professionals in all kinds of jobs will undergo professional development. So it can be everything from doing our own reading or courses or talking to a colleague and so on. But what I'm trying to argue is that we need the last one here, which is some kind of negotiation when there's a digitalization in the workplace, when some new system is introduced, that we need to take a step back and think about how this is affecting everybody's work, in this case, the teachers, and understand how teachers are feeling, that hopefully they'll be feeling positive about some things, but vulnerable about others, and then helping them to negotiate how they might go forward. And if I go back to the framework that I had before, the reason this is important is because if what's happening in the workplace in the outer part of this circle does not align with what's in the inner part, so our identity and how we feel about being a teacher, then we're not going to have the transformation that we think we're going to have, because the humans are not cooperating with the technologies. And of course, humans not cooperating with technologies might be okay. It might signal a problem with the technology or how it's been implemented. So what we need to do is to set up forms of negotiation. And so that's the next chapter. And for this act, I want to present another case. And this case, again, was a study that was done from a team that I was leading when I worked at the UK Open University. And this is, again, in the health sector. So it's about antimicrobial resistance. Now, antimicrobial resistance is one of the biggest health challenges. It's to do with the resistance of microbes to antibiotics, and it's caused by overuse of antibiotics. And if we don't change this pretty quickly, then the World Health Organization estimates that by 2030, there'll be 40 million people will have died that didn't need to die because antibiotics don't work for them. And the countries that are particularly vulnerable to this are low to middle income countries. Some of those are in Africa and in Asia. So we were asked by the UK government to set up a course for health professionals in these countries to learn about antimicrobial resistance and then to change their practice. And this was funded through the Fleming Fund. So what we did was lots of site visits, and we did lots of interviews with health professionals across 3 different countries. And you can see that in the table the range of different professional roles, the people that we interviewed. So we found three key things, and these 3 key things are 3 of the vulnerabilities that I mentioned before. So one is that people had concerns about their practice having to change. Now, these were radical changes in practice for some of these countries because the clinicians were writing down in paper notebooks ways that, the antibiotics that had been given out and what the outcome was. You know, I mean, in our health systems, this is all done digitally, and the data can be used to be analysed to look at antimicrobial resistance. So to move from a notebook system to a digital system is a radical change. Secondly, there were concerns about trust, because whenever you change systems in that way and people are working with others indirectly, then it can lead to a lack of trust. And the third is, again, as I mentioned before, that not everyone had access to the same kinds of equipment. So this caused a concern as well. So what we did was we tried to find ways that forms of professional development where people could negotiate these different vulnerabilities. So they would have to choose which one did they think applied to their workplace, and then run some kind of professional development. So one was about concerns about practice. So having to learn to do things in a radically different way. And what we did was we worked with these health professionals to co-design a way that would help them work with their teams to think about what their concerns were about practice. Now, because we're talking about low to middle income countries, some of which don't have electricity all the time, we couldn't make it entirely online, right? So we created a guide that could be used by someone on site or could be used online if they had online access to bring teams together. This is just a screenshot. I'm not expecting you to read all the text. But the idea here is that a team manager or a head of a department or something can bring people together and help them to think about the new practice and hear the concerns, and then make a collective decision about whether they should change something in terms of the practice or their workplace, and go forward with that negotiated decision. Again, for the trust concerns, one of the things here was that when you set up a new way of working, there are new roles, new people, and the people in the established practices don't really understand what these new roles are about. So you need to build trust. And again, we co-designed with these people a way of running some kind of workshop or community where they could bring people together. These are the guidelines for team managers. They could bring people together and each person would explain what their role was, and they would build a picture of the whole system so they could see why it's important for one person to do their job in a particular way and then pass that to someone else. And then for the unequal resource access, this was particularly important because sometimes people were going on courses, they were learning new knowledge, they were learning about new practice, and they were going back to the workplace and they couldn't implement it because they didn't have any of the equipment there. Or maybe their workplace was arranged in the wrong way to be able to implement new practice. So again, there was a way to bring people together and to talk openly and honestly about how they might have to reorganize their workplace. So these tools themselves are probably not the kind of things that we would need for education, but the process, the idea of bringing people together and thinking about these vulnerabilities and planning ways to be able to negotiate around it probably is relevant. So these tools have covered these different vulnerabilities that are shaded here in black, but there's a lot more to do. So now I'm on to Act 5, sacrifice. What do I mean by that? Well, I want to tell you about the 1887 International Congress of Astronomers. Here's a photo of the people who went to Paris in 1887. And these were the main astronomers from around the world. And what happened was something unique, something that had never happened before, certainly not in astronomy and probably not even in science. These people got together and they drew up a map of the sky, and each of them took a part of the sky that they were going to study. And what that meant was that they sacrificed their ability to take their telescope and point it to any part of the sky. And they did that because they knew that there was a benefit, a greater good in terms of each of them studying different parts of the sky, so they could then collaborate together and have a map of the whole sky. So what I mean by sacrifice is sometimes there's a huge benefit which we really want to achieve, and we'll then be willing to sacrifice something which is actually really important to us because the benefit is bigger than the sacrifice. So going back to the previous case studies we had, we were interested in this notion of sacrifice and negotiation. So we went back to the people that we worked with on the data sharing and the astronomy, and we ran a learning design workshop with them. So we asked them, what are the main vulnerabilities that you've told us? And what is it that you would build in order for people to be able to negotiate these vulnerabilities? And we had 4 groups, and these are the vulnerabilities that they chose in the second column here. So I've already gone through them. So what I will do is I'll tell you about what they came up with. So in this workshop, we used a tool called the Learning Designer, which was developed by my colleague Diana Laurillard and Eileen Kennedy at UCL. And if you're interested in learning design tools and being able to share learning designs digitally online for free, then look up Learning Designer UCL and you can use the tool for free. So the tool itself is based on the conversational framework which has been developed by Diana Laurillard some decades ago. And Diana tried to put a topology on different ways that students learn. And she's got 6 learning types, from acquisition, where people might read something or watch something, to collaboration, where they collaborate or discuss, to inquiry learning, to practice, so by doing something, to production, producing something. So these are the 6 learning types. And so what we did was there's a learning design tool that people can use, and it can help them to be able to design if they're not used to learning design. And it helps people think more broadly than, oh, I'll show a video or I'll give my students a reading. Or it makes them think about going beyond acquisition and thinking about the other learning types as well. And what we found was that the people that we were working with found this methodology so easy to use and so intuitive that they came up with a design pretty quickly, much faster than we thought. We gave them a couple of hours and they came up with something in about an hour. So the first group, that chose concerns about inadequacy. What they were worried about was that professionals were really worried with digitalization processes. They were really worried about seeming to be inadequate and not knowing enough. I don't know if that resonates with you, but it certainly resonates with me. I quite often think, oh, I should know this, or, and it's really difficult, particularly when technologies are changing so quickly. So they came up with learning design that would bring professionals together to talk about what their concerns were, and maybe produce some kind of recommendations or some kind of hints or tips for people to understand how they might feel better about using the technologies or how they learn to use it. So this is group 3, and you can see I've marked out what their learning design looks like. It's here in a pie chart with the amount of time spent on each type of learning. So there's quite a lot of production because they're asked to produce something. But there's also many different other types like practice and inquiry and so on. And that's what the learning design looks like in the online learning designer. So the second group, they were dealing with the concern about leadership, and they very much recognized the vulnerabilities that leaders feel. So what they did was they suggested this community of practice, and again, they came up with a design so that the leaders could come together and could share the thoughts about, well, how do we move to these new practices? Should we move to them? Is there a concern that they have? And this is group 1. So again, I've marked the learning design, and you can see that there's a lot of collaboration here, and also there's a lot of discussion. So this is very sharing and interactive. And this is how it looks on the online learning designer. So other groups can take this design, they can modify it for their own purposes, they can use it. The third group and the fourth group chose the same one, which is early career people feeling anxious about being recognized. But those two groups designed something quite different, which is quite interesting. So group 2 decided that what the people that hire new people should do is think about, if we're changing work, what is it that we should then recognize in the new work? And you can see that the learning design that they have there, again, has a lot of collaboration and discussion. So what they suggested is that there's some kind of narrative CV, which is a way of bringing together people's expertise, and then thinking about, well, is this the kind of expertise that we need in the future? And therefore, is this the kind of expertise that we should reward and recognize? Or should we reward and recognize something else? And maybe that's something that we should think about in education. This is the learning design on the learning designer. And again, it can be reused and adapted. So the second group that dealt with the same problem addressed the problem from a completely different position. So what they did was they suggested that the professionals should get together and should think about what is it, they should have a safe space to think about what is it that needs to be recognized. So maybe things that they're doing that is meta work, that's not recognized at all, should come into the rewards and recognition area. And so they're group 4, and you can see on the right-hand side, the learning design that they had, again, had quite a lot of collaboration in it and some discussion, although there was also acquisition because they were asking people to read things. So these are very different ways to create spaces for negotiation. And this is what this one looks like on the learning designer. So we had 4 different groups who were addressing these different vulnerabilities, and they each came up with different ways of doing it that's contextualized to their workspace. But, this offers a way for all of us to think about how can we create these negotiation spaces so that people can negotiate their practice, their identity, and what they do. And the reason I believe that that's important is because we have to put the humans first before the technology, rather than what we do often now is put the technology first and then the humans have to adapt. So we know that there are these vulnerabilities, and we know that there are different ways that we've already, or people have already designed to overcome them. And the important thing is it's the people in these jobs who are designing it, not us. We're just working with them to do it. So what does all this mean? We've got the idea of digitalization and meta work, and this creates potential vulnerabilities, and we want new ways of supporting professional development allows people to negotiate their identity. So the meta work is this liminal space that it puts people in a sometimes uncomfortable situation. So it provides a point at which we can get people together to really renegotiate how work should be in the future. And in terms of teachers, I think that's really important, because we know that sometimes there are examples of technologies being introduced, and they do offer some benefits, but they also are difficult for the teacher. So the teacher should be able to negotiate. How does this fit with my work? And we need to put the teacher first. One thing that we have done is we're now using this framework with a group of people across completely different sectors, from health to energy to science sector and so on, where we're working with them so that we're using some methodologies to identify the cultural challenges that they feel because of digitalization at their work. We're bringing them together so that they can reframe these challenges and think about what the future will look like. And in our new work, we're working with the Edinburgh Futures Institute so they can help people develop future scenarios. Then with them, we'll co-design different pathways so that they are bringing their knowledge of the workplace and thinking about what's needed in terms of facilitating this collaborative learning and negotiation. And of course, at the end of this, we want to long-term evaluate the impact of it on the workplace. Now, all ideas come from armies of people. We stand on the giants of others. I've told you about some of the people who influenced my work over the years. But also I want to say a special thank you to my collaborators, Francisco Duran del Fierro, Eileen Kennedy, Louise Chisholm, who are at UCL, and also Kua Charatonos, who's at the Open University, because their work is also reflected in this presentation. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Shikin, and thank you, Professor Littlejohn, for a very interesting talk about this idea of rehumanizing learning in the era of AI in education. And I'm particularly interested in this idea of negotiation. And it seems like from your seminar, you talk about the means to negotiate identity and work is through collaboration and bringing people together. And I wonder if the audience here today will have any questions about that. Because one of the questions I'm wondering, and now I'm taking this role as a moderator to ask my first question while you're thinking about your next question, is really what kind of features should this kind of professional development take? I mean, are there any special features? Because for a long time, I think in education, teachers have been collaborating. You know, they work in professional learning teams. They have things like lesson study. So is there anything else that teachers need to do in order to bring the human back into AI?
I think that, a key change in terms of digitalization is, as I said, that not only is the division of labor changed by the implementation of technology, but relationships are changed. For example, the relationship between the teacher and the student, but also new and unseen relationships. Like we have relationships with people who developed the technology. It's just that we don't know who they are. It's a kind of indirect relationship, and the people who are using the data. The difference, I think, is that we need that open and honest understanding of what's going well, and what might be a barrier to not just adoption of technology. There's worse than adoption of technology, and that's bad adoption of technology. So technology can be adopted in ways where it's having outcomes that were never intended. So I think it's really important, especially in an era of AI and data, which is so pervasive, that we take the time to pause and to think about what these issues are. So that's the extra bit. Yes, we come together, we plan our lessons, we even discuss our students and their progress and so on. But I think we need this extra, which is having a deep identification of what these issues are, which will take some methods. If you ask me, so what's the problem you had earlier with your microphone? I probably couldn't really articulate, but if you give me time to reflect and think about it, then maybe I can articulate and, how it makes me feel, and maybe it's fine, maybe it wasn't fine. I don't know what I would say, but I think there's a need for this so that we can then address the issues by negotiating.
So there's this question. I mean, we are all very concerned about how workload has increased, and you alluded to the fact that metal work, actually creates some form of hidden work that previously wasn't there. And so how can we then help our fellow colleagues reflect the shift in this identity and strengthen our roles and responsibilities while adopting AI?
Well, the thing about metalwork, as I explained, is it can make us feel uncomfortable. It can, but it puts us in that liminal space. So we're in a different kind of space, and that gives us opportunity to then think about how to move forward, and how and whether we should adopt new ways of working. So it's possible that technologies can mean that we have extra work that we didn't have before. Is that extra work helpful or not? So, for example, we've been working with colleagues in Oslo. We've been looking at the health sector digitalization, and it's an automatic system for patient data. And doctors and nurses have to put in data when they're with the patients. The nurses, neither of them have done this before, so it's extra work. The nurses feel they have to do it. The doctors just don't do it. So there comes gaps in the data, which is difficult. But the thing is that maybe by putting in those data, it allows a point of reflection. So yeah, by stepping back and considering this and thinking about, well, is that part of my identity as a doctor, for example? This could help in terms of thinking, well, yeah, maybe this is something I should do. On the other hand, maybe at that point it's important to go back to the people who designed the system, or somebody, the people implementing the system, saying we need some kind of workaround here or some way of dealing with it. But at least it opens up a space to think about, well, what needs to be done.
So I have some questions from the audience through Mentimeter. So this is the top rated question now. Are there research on how teachers are taking to the rates of change of AI? And how can we take care of teachers as we put students at the center of all that we do?
I mean, that's such a good question. So there are studies that are looking, I don't know if it's looking at the rate of change. It's looking at change, but the rate of change, I don't know. Maybe colleagues know of studies that I'm unaware of. But yes, the rate of change is increasing, without a doubt. And even if we never implement any more technology in schools, the rate of use of technology will increase because, a lot of the use of technology is outside the schools, and there's not much that we can do about that other than engage with it and embrace it. But surely that's going to be very stressful for teachers. So I do think that creating some kind of forum where people can hopefully be honest, or even if they feel they can't actually articulate, they don't feel they have the comfort or the security of articulating themselves what these issues are. We need ways of maybe identifying it by not asking people to shout out, actually, I can't deal with my workload, but having another way. But that puts us in a space where we can then really think about how people are working and think about how we need to maybe rearrange it. And that is an important feature of the future workplace, because workplaces are not static. They're changing constantly. And it's even more important for teachers because, teachers are at the interface with students, and how they feel will affect the students. So I don't know if I can't say to you in school X, you should have this kind of forum or this way of dealing with it. It very much depends on the school itself. But what I'm trying to propose is a process, a way to think about how you might do that within your school.
So we have a playful question here. So I'm going to ask this very playful question.
Right.
And this person asked, playing the devil's advocate, could you share with us your initial imaginations? Should efforts to dehumanize learning in the age of AI and education fall short?
My imagination about dehumanizing learning? Well, I think learning is dehumanized all the time, is it not? I mean, I think that there are tools that are designed and introduced that, in my personal and professional view, are not exactly addressing some of the concerns that teachers have or the needs of the students either. And that's a worry for me. There are a lot of these edtech apps are developed by startup companies. And on the one hand, I appreciate that if you're running a company or a startup, you need to make money. I mean, actually, I've worked with a lot of edtech startup CEOs, and they're generally very nice people, and they mean well. They're not just trying to be money grabbing from schools or whatever, but they need to make a profit. And sometimes I think maybe it's a shortcut, or maybe it's not understanding the deep expertise of teachers, not having the right ways to make sure that the tools are designed to be firstly based on what students need, and secondly designed in ways that can address that need, which probably involves some kind of interaction with or feedback. I think a lot of technology CEOs I've met are very highly intelligent, highly self-regulated people, and I'm generalizing here, but I do think that sometimes they extrapolate and they think that people learn like they do, but they don't. So I don't think it's devil's advocate. I mean, this is a real world where there are lots of technologies that are being developed that are not fit for purpose. And that puts a burden on us as educators to identify. It's almost signal to noise ratio. So which of these tools out there are actually useful, and in what ways are they useful?
I mean, thank you very much for that thought. I mean, as a follow-up to that, your response, it seems like sometimes we place too much responsibility on teachers, especially when the adoption of technology fails. When actually it's the technology or even those people who design the technology that are problematic. So how can we, as educators, avoid placing too much responsibility on teachers?
Well, there's one way that we can avoid taking the power away from the technologists, and that's don't buy their tools, right? But why do we buy their tools? We buy it because we actually think that there are some benefits in these tools, right? I mean, who would run a school and buy something they thought had no benefits, right? So there are benefits, but sometimes the tools are not designed in a way that a teacher would design. I mean, this is a problem in any interdisciplinary area where you're bringing together people who before didn't work with one another closely. So, you've got technologists, you've got data scientists, you've got people who are developing AI, you've got teachers, and that's not even to mention the students themselves. I mean, they're really important. They need to be part of this mix, and the parents, of course. So some people are using like co-design or participatory design methodologies, which hopefully are coming out with some good designs that are having positive impact on schools. But they tend to be the kinds of tools that are maybe funded either by the big tech that's got the money that you need to do that, to bring the people together, or by research money, for example, that then gets translated into enterprise tools that can be developed further. But then in between that, there's a lot of people who think, I want to have my own company. I want to have an startup. Tech is a cool thing. Ed tech, fantastic. And I know what to do. And they maybe create really nice content from a media perspective, but not something that's really dealing with those issues.
So because you keep talking about students, role of students in this whole thing. So I'm wondering, there's this question about students, because sometimes students are not interested in learning. They just want to get the job done, and how do we encourage students, to use perhaps AI in a way that really augments their learning rather than take away their learning?
Yeah. Well, I would argue that this issue of what motivates the student is not particularly about technology, because I think that even without technology, some students want to get grades to maybe get a place after school, university, and so maybe we equate qualifications with progress, with jobs. So that's not about technology, but AI makes it a lot more complicated, doesn't it? Because the AI can be a partner in, I don't need to learn. As long as I come up with the right answer, then, I will get the grade. And on the one hand, it does make us reflect on what it is that we're testing, right? If a machine can come up with the right answer, are we really testing in the way that we think we're testing? So I know there are lots of places that are rethinking assessment. It's easier for universities to do that rather than schools. But it raises these questions. But I do think that often when you get a new technology, it will raise questions about something which has already been there, and it's been there for decades, and we haven't done anything about it. So maybe now is the time to really start rethinking.
Yeah, I sometimes wonder whether AI really, creates that chasm between, those who understand the purpose of education and those who don't.
Yeah.
And I guess, this creates a chance for us to now relook at this possibility of renegotiating, the identity of us as learners and us as teachers.
Mm.
Well, moving on, I think there's a couple of interesting questions, so I'm going to just run through them, unless there's anyone on the audio. Feeling also. So sorry, I forgot about you.
First, I'd like to thank Professor John Little for a very insightful lecture, okay, and sharing, okay. So, I like this concept of it's important for us to identify our vulnerability and start this negotiation process. And to write on what Man Heng mentioned about, the complexity when AI comes into the picture of using it as a tool for teaching and learning. So my question would be, when it comes to AI literacy for teachers, what are some essential components that we should be looking into? Because a lot of times we are the end user, right? It's being dished out. We do not know the algorithm behind it, the biasness behind it. So we need to start perhaps thinking about how to educate and create this awareness for our teachers. So just wanted to hear your perspective on this. Thank you.
It's a great question, so thanks for asking. I think the most important thing is not just for teachers, but for students as well, is to understand that AI is not what I would call intelligent. I mean, I think for me, it's an unfortunate term. I mean, the people that came up with it was a long time ago, Alan Turing, very long time ago. So it was very forward thinking. But the reason I don't think AI is intelligent at the moment is because our intelligence is regulated by a whole range of different things. It's, we take in data as humans, which is a much wider range of data than AI uses it. It's not just sight or smell or taste or whatever. It's also, we compute all of that in our brains, and we have emotions, right? And so all of these things regulate how we come up with a conclusion. AI can't do that. But unfortunately, it gives people the impression that it can, and that's where it becomes dangerous. Because, I mean, all AI is doing, it cannot come up with a creative solution. It might seem creative, but that's because some human somewhere has done the creativity for it. And all it's doing is going out there. I mean, what it can do is so amazing and powerful that we're impressed by it as humans, because it can scan much faster than we can. It can use a lot more data, but then it's almost like a parrot, right? It brings back something, maybe can change it a little bit, but this is creativity from humans. And in fact, sometimes it's not even creativity from humans; it's nonsense that it makes. It's almost a lie, we would call it, right? So I think that understanding what AI actually is very important. And for me, that would be a fundamental part of literacy. I think it's unrealistic to expect that we will all become data scientists and that, we will be experts in AI. I think that that's too far. And I don't think that we need to be users of AI. To be honest, some of the AI experts that I talk to don't really understand how some AI works. And especially, AI is being used now to code a lot of code that creates new AI. So in that way, people don't really know the code that's being generated. So there's a lot of unknown out there, even from the experts. And I think even understanding that is important, because it helps us to appreciate how much we can and cannot trust AI.
Well, follow up on that point. It's again, going back to really understand what AI can do and what AI cannot do.
Mm-hmm.
And one distinctive feature of being human is like what you said, is to be creative.
Mm-hmm.
Humankind has shown to be very creative even, since long time ago. And I think teaching is that creative work.
Mm-hmm.
Because teachers work with students is so highly contextualized, they are nuanced in many ways, and it's highly labor intensive.
Mm.
Of course, then the question comes, there's an encouragement for us to use AI, even in teaching and learning. So how can AI help? If really AI is not that intelligent, why should I use AI?
Well, AI is, I don't mean to play it down all the time, right? AI is absolutely brilliant at a lot of things. It is already transforming how we understand the climate and how we understand health diagnosis, drug discovery. I said to you, and I haven't told you, I said I had a job which has been replaced by AI. Now, it's not entirely true, okay? But, so my original profession, I was a scientist, I was a chemist, a protein crystallographer. So my job was to work in a big international team and work out the structure of a protein. And this took this big team across different countries 4 years to do. And then in 2018, Google released Google AlphaFold, and it can do the same thing in a matter of either weeks or months without any experimental work. We had huge amounts of experimental work. Now, what that means, Google AlphaFold basically unlocks drug discovery at a level we haven't known. Of course, it couldn't do what it does without our structure and all the previous people that worked before us. So it's building on our work and creating something which is transforming drug discovery. So, all of these things are unbelievable. And of course, in the creative industry, so we're talking about creativity, and they're really, really worried about what AI is going to do for their jobs. Because they have copyright, they have creative ideas, they've put so much energy and thought and intelligence into those ideas. And AI is somehow picking up these ideas and repackaging it into something else. And that something else can look amazing and can seem super creative. So maybe in the near future, there will be creative AI. It's developing so fast, so quickly, that it's really hard, even for the people who are, the CEO of NVIDIA or, Microsoft or whatever, even they don't really know what's going to come up in the next few years.
And that's kind of vulnerable, I guess. This is the last question. If nobody else is going to ask any question, this is your last call because time is up. I just want to leave, or kind of conclude this seminar with maybe one last question. And this is really trying to put all the questions that I have here, and trying to kind of ask that one last question.
ChatGPT could do that for you.
Yes. Unfortunately, I don't have ChatGPT on my iPad now. So I'm doing it really. It
would probably not make sense, though,
the
question.
So I'm just really trying to put everything here and just to ask that one question. Now, if I ask you today, what do you think the future of education will look like? At least in something that you desire. what role should AI play in that future?
What the future of education will look like and what I want it to be are probably two different things, because what I've wanted from technology is not always what it is. So what I think the future might evolve into is new tools that are beyond what we conceive at the moment. I mean, already there are tools which look at more of our senses than the tools at the moment. At the moment, we read, watch, and so on here, you know, but digital touch is on its way. And that has lots of ethical implications. We haven't even touched on the ethics yet, or the guide rails. But for example, there's a group of people led by Kerry Jewett in the Knowledge Lab who are looking at digital touch in the context of everything from industry to learning to intimacy. And they've been considering questions like, imagine that you share a hug with your partner, right? A digital hug. And then imagine that your partner shares your digital hug with someone else. And you might think that would never happen. But things like that are happening already. People are sharing images, photographs that they really don't have permission to share. And that is, you know, causing upset. So what I'm saying is that there are things that we can't even imagine. Maybe some of these will come into education, but there'll be technologies that can be used and can support learning in ways that are beyond what we imagine now. Now, what I want for AI is that the focus will be very much on the relationship between the teacher and the student, but not to take away from that relationship, not to replace it, not to be a substitute teacher, but to enhance that relationship for the teacher. So to support the teacher in ways so that they can have an even more enriching and beneficial relationship with the student. That's my hope for the future.
Thank you for that hope. And on that hope, let's give Professor Littlejohn a round of applause.
Thank you very much. Thank you.